Hello, Buckeyes. I'm excited to be talking about step number 3 in the process that we're going through. I'm especially excited about this step because this is my favorite one to go through in the research process. It's where everything really comes together. All the hard work you've done in step 1 and step 2 will pay off on this step. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about putting together our study materials. And it's in this case, especially, that this is where the rubber hits the road, meaning that everything that you've done comes to this point where you start talking about putting our manipulations together with our dependent variables and start putting together materials that you're going to then be giving to our participants. So in this step, you're going to make the actual materials that you'll be giving to your participants. And it's the most important step, and it's the one that's the most exciting because once we do this step, we really can't go back. So the idea here is we're going to solidify the manipulation. We're going to solidify those measures that you've been looking for that you established in step 2, and we're going to put them all together so that participants can go through your experiment, experience your manipulation, record how they feel, and then you're going to use that data to then analyze it and incorporate it into your study, incorporate it into your final paper write-up. So that's where we're going with step number 3. So what I'm going to do to help you out this is I will post my specific example materials on Carmen. So it'll be in a module for step number 3. So you can look at those materials. And this is an especially good guide to follow because my materials will look pretty similar to yours. So the basic study setup will be the same kind of in terms of the instructions, the layout of things, how the dependent variables will look. All of that will be consistent between what I'm doing and what you guys are doing. There'll be variation in kind of the setup and the delivery of the manipulation, but you can use that as an ultimate template. And I'll go back and forth between these slides and that template as we go through and do this kind of mini lesson here. So the first aspect of your materials that you need to take care of is the design of your manipulation. So we've talked about several different manipulations in class. You guys have done an awesome job establishing those, setting those up. I'm excited for all the manipulations. Now what we have to do is decide how will you manipulate your independent variable. And for some of you, you're very set on this. You're very clear on how to do it. For others of you, you kind of have to do a little more work on trying to identify exactly how you're going to do it. And this manipulation of your independent variable should have some basis in previous research. Okay, so the idea here is that you should be able to go back to some previous research that you've identified and support why is this a good manipulation? Why does this manipulation do what you intend it to do? And where's the foundation for kind of where you base this manipulation on? So, for example, in my study, participants were randomly assigned to receive one of the following manipulations. So they'll either receive a manipulation saying, imagine all group members, imagine a small group interaction, where all group members stay throughout the entire interaction. In a separate condition that other participants will be randomly assigned to, one group member leaves. So they should imagine a small group interaction where one of the group members leaves in the middle of the interaction. Remember, this is kind of one of the most interesting groups I'm wanting to look at. And the third is this is where the participants excluded. So imagine a small group interaction where the group members exclude you from the task. Now, the reason why I'm using this is that these type of imagined scenarios have been used in research previously. So we call this a pre-living manipulation in ostracism. So participants writing out their response to these is something that's been done before. Specifically, I'm going to use manipulations that have been done before in terms of asking participants to tell me what would happen step by step in detail and to tell me how that made them feel. So getting them to kind of expand on that experience. So let me switch out to the document that I put together for your example, and I'll show you what this looks like. All right, so here you'll see an example of my study materials. And again, this is something that you can utilize as a good example of how to set yours up. Here I labeled that this is condition 1, and I'm going to record the participant number. The participant number is just the number that I'm going to assign to each participant randomly. So you can just kind of start from 1 and work your way up. The idea there is that just so that you can go back to this packet if you need to. Now you'll see I provided general instructions. In this study, you will imagine a group interaction and answer a few questions about this interaction. Then as I note here for you guys, I'm then going to deliver the manipulation. So in the writing instructions, participants are asked to imagine a small group interaction while all group members stay throughout the entire interaction. So I just got done talking about how this is one of the conditions participants could be randomly assigned to. Participants then are asked in the space below, write what you imagine happening during the task and take your time explaining. So now they're going to provide their response by going through it step by step. Participants will also indicate how they felt during the group task that they imagined, taking their time explaining this, again, putting their response in. Okay. So this is what they're going to be doing in my manipulation to set up the different conditions, being able to look at what happens when individuals leave a group in terms of group member leaving the group, or the group excludes them. So this first part is the first aspect of the design that you're going to set up in terms of your manipulation. This is an example how I did mine. Okay. So let me switch back here to our notes talking about each of the steps. Give me just a moment to do that. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about our second aspect of your materials. And this is going to build off of step 2 that you just completed. So the second step here in our third step overall is to include your dependent variable measures. So indicate how are you going to measure your dependent variable? How are you going to measure that outcome that you're interested in? And to do this, you're going to include the scales you identified that will measure the outcomes you're interested in. So you'll remember in step 2, I asked you to identify the dependent variables that you're interested in. And I asked you with that step to find the actual items and scales that you want to incorporate into your study. So from those scales, you're going to include the instructions, the actual items, so the questions that participants are completing, and the scale participants will be responding on. Now, for the majority of you, you're going to use a scale response. If you're using something different, you can kind of contact me, but the same overall idea applies. So that's one piece of the second step, is to getting in those scales that you identified that you want to use as your dependent variables. The other thing I want you to include is a manipulation check or two in order to determine if your participants recognize the manipulation. So on a between participant basis, do they have different responses based on that manipulation that you gave them? So you want to ask a question to identify the participants across the conditions. Notice the differences between them. Okay, so is there something you're manipulating systematically? Are they seeing between the conditions that systematic change? Are participants responding differently? So to give you an example, I included 2 manipulation checks in my study. The first is I asked participants how many of the group members left the group interaction. This was to assess if participants recalled if a group member left the interaction. Do they even kind of remember that that was part of their task? The second question was set up to assess if participants correctly imagined a time that they were ostracized. So what % of the time were you included by the group during the interaction you imagined? In that condition where I asked participants if they were excluded, I want to see if they recognize that, if they felt like they were included less during the interaction. So let me switch out back again to my example so that you can see what I'm talking about in terms of our dependent variables. So again, this is where we left off with our independent variables. Now you'll see the dependent variables. So I give them instructions for our first set of dependent variables. In this case, that first set of dependent variables is the basic needs. So for the following questions, answer how you felt based on the interaction you imagined. Please read each statement carefully and indicate how you felt by choosing a number from 1 to 5 on the scale. You can bold the number you agree with. So here I tell participants the instructions for what they're supposed to do, how they're supposed to read things, and how they're supposed to give their response. In this case, because we're going to be doing things over email or at least through computers, you can go ahead and have participants respond based on bolding the number that they agree with here in the statements. So participants will go through the basic needs. They'll get a second set of instructions here asking them to talk about and record how dehumanized they felt to respond to these particular items. You guys can take a look at this. Again, it'll be posted on Carmen. I then asked them the manipulation checks. So I asked them here, how many group members left the group interaction to see if they correctly imagined a time when one person left, and what % of the time that they were included by the group during that interaction. I asked them just for your age, or for participants' age and gender. You'll do the same thing as well, just to collect some basic demographic information. So your study will look very similar to this. You'll notice that when you look at my example, all the conditions are together. I'm going to ask you guys, though, to send them in separately to make it a little bit easier to go through things. So with that being in mind, let's talk about how we're going to get this next step approved. Okay, so let me share that with you. So for approval for the study, you're going to send me your materials. This is an exciting moment to get those materials together. So as I alluded to just a minute ago, in 3 separate Word documents, send me each of your conditions. So that means 1 condition for each Word document. I will say that this step might take some revision, but it's a critical step for your project because we want to make sure we're really getting at the manipulations and the measures that you want to have. We want to make sure it's especially clear since you won't necessarily be with the participant to answer any questions that they have. And the biggest reason why this might take some revision is that this step sets up your study. So this is a little bit of a tough step to get through, but once you have it, you're going to then get into data collection, and you're going to start using the results participants have to your study here as part of your overall completion of the research. So it's a big step. It's especially a big step because, again, we can't go back after we go here. So we're going to solidify everything. Okay? Most importantly with everything, stay safe, stay healthy. If there's things I can help you with, please let me know. I'm happy to do that outside of class, during class as well. But this is an exciting step. Congratulations to getting to this point, and I'm excited to help you guys work your way through this piece.